Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mary Hunt here at the Water Office. I want to welcome you to our Water Talk on Wednesday, April 10th, 2024, 2 days after the recent eclipse. I'm the co-director of Water along with Diane New, who is here, and our staff colleagues Pamela Miller, a Master of Divinity student at Wesley Theological Seminary, and Lisa Lautenbach from Nuremberg, Germany, who's with us for a year as part of the Church of the Brethren volunteer program. And we are delighted to have as our guest today, Professor Oluwatomisin Olayinka Oredein. And I am doing my best with the phonetic spelling, but I will be referring to Professor as Professor Oredein. And if that's permissible, is that going to work? You want to say it once for me?
Professor O, Professor Oredein, Dr. O, whichever flows best.
All right. Professor Oredein will flow. She will speak with us today about her 2023 book, The Theology of Mercy Amba Oduyoye. And the book is subtitled Ecumenism, Feminism, and Communal Practice. It's published by the University of Notre Dame Press, 2023, and it comes from her doctoral dissertation. And as many of you know, Dr. Mercy Amba Oduyoye is a world-renowned theologian, one of the founders of the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians. And I'm hoping that not only will we hear about her work, but that we will hear about Professor Oredein's work as well, because it really is, as I understand it, following in the footsteps of one of the great women of our time. And also you have your own important message, your own important voice, which came through, by the way, in what I thought was going to be rather a standard kind of biographical treatment and a little bit of, no, your own voice is very strong in this. And so I really want to hear, we want to hear that as well. Let us begin then, as we always do at Water, with a land acknowledgement. This is something that we have incorporated into our programs to remind ourselves of why we do what we do and what we need to do more of, given the systemic injustice Indigenous and other people of color face in this country. A land acknowledgement is a beginning, not an end. It's a time to reflect on our history and to commit to justice making. We here at Water in Silver Spring, Maryland, are on Indigenous land, the traditional and contemporary land of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. We acknowledge today the trauma and injustice toward Indigenous people and other people of color that are deep in the U.S. culture. These oppressions are deep in U.S. culture and history. We join in efforts to eradicate them and to make reparations for the genocide involved. Water's work, whether intellectual, spiritual, or liturgical, is aimed to bring about social justice. And so I invite you just for a moment, just for a quiet moment, to consider the Native people on whose land you sit. Feel free to put their names in the chat if you wish. Thank you so much. Water's work brings feminist womanist spiritual values and intellectual efforts at social change to the fore. Our hope is that by sharing this kind of work in this kind of setting, we're socializing the resources of feminist womanist work and religion, and thus spreading tools and energy for justice. This work, in my view, is too important to be left to students in a theological school. It must be socialized as widely as possible. Let me explain our format today. I will introduce our speaker, who will take up to 20 minutes, probably less, but up to 20 minutes to introduce us to her new book. There'll be plenty of time for dialogue, for questions and conversation. I invite you to listen and enjoy. We here at Water will take notes, which will be on our website shortly, along with the video of this session. You just look on the Water website at www.waterwomensalliance.org and go to the program section, and you'll see all of the recent programs of Water, and this one is under Water Talks. I'd invite you now to mute your audio to cut down on noise and assure a clear line for the presentation. And when Professor O finishes, you can join the conversation, and I'll give instructions at that point on how to do it. We will end today at 2 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time to respect everyone's schedule. especially Dr. O's, as she's been so gracious as to start her class today a little bit late to accommodate us. You can re-listen or point other people in the direction of this teleconference again by going to our website, looking under programs, and enjoying the video. So if you don't get everything the first time, it's okay. It's there for your use as you need it. We'll keep the Zoom line open for those who wish to continue conversation for a bit after 2 o'clock, but the official session will end with our gratitude to our speaker for her very valuable contribution. Having read her book, I can say very clearly how important it is. So I am happy to welcome the author. Look at this wonderful cover. Isn't it wonderful? Dr. Oredein, also called Dr. O by her students, comes from Nigeria. I learned from her Brite Divinity School bio that she did her undergraduate degree at the University of Virginia, then a Master of Divinity at Duke Divinity School, and a THD also at Duke. She is an elder in the Presbyterian Church and active in scholarly circles. Dr. O is professor at Brite, where she teaches classes in Black religious traditions, constructive theology, and ethics, directs the Black Studies program, and has been recognized by her students for her outstanding teaching. And I would guess, without fear of being very wrong, that we'll see that today. She wrote her doctoral dissertation on the great Ghanaian theologian, Dr. Mercy Amba Oduyoye, known as the grandmother of womanist theology, a great inspiration to and friend of our own Dr. Katie Cannon of blessed memory. I first read Dr. O's work on Mercy in the Across Generations interview that they did together in the Journal of Feminist Studies in Religion, all of these references will be in the notes, so don't worry about getting them. But this is the journal, the JFSR, as it's called, the Journal of Feminist Studies in Religion, in case you don't know it. This was an interview done for a section called Across Generations, and young scholars interview older scholars is basically the way it works. And this is in volume 32, number 2, fall 2016. So this is now some years ago that you and Mercy did this interview. It's very lively and informative. It's a discussion between two colleagues who are indeed from different generations, but united in their insights into an enthusiasm about theology done by women of African descent. It's a great read. So when today's volume, that is the book we're looking at today, emerged, I knew, having read the interview, that we had to have you to talk about Mercy's work, and we had to have you also to talk about your own work, which follows, I think, very much the trajectory that Mercy set. So welcome to you, Dr. O. We look forward to your remarks, and we hope more than ever you feel at home here, that you are among friends and colleagues at Water, and we come with the greatest of respect to learn from you. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hunt. That was such a lovely introduction. Thank you so much for taking my work seriously and honoring the breadth of my work. Thank you to the Water staff for the work that you've done to make today possible and to make the opportunity for our conversation and interaction possible as well. I am very glad to be here. Dr. Hunt is right. I will speak up to 20 minutes. We are not going to get to 20 minutes. I believe in honoring attention spans, and also I believe in conversation more than lecturing. I will offer some written thoughts. I might go off the cuff a little bit, but otherwise, I am most excited for the conversation that we're going to have together, the questions that come from you and what ideas they spark and where they take us. So please, no question is too big, no question is too small. I want us to get to all of it. But first, let me just offer a few thoughts around this lovely book that was an honor and a joy to research and write. So I have a couple questions that I'm just gonna offer some thoughts and some responses around. And again, I might add to, and then we'll just kind of get into our larger conversation together. So a lot of people ask me, okay, Dr. O, what's the point? What's the central message of your book? At the heart of the Theology of Mercy, Amba Oduyoye, is a close look at all that goes into the respective lens of a theological figure. Yes, I attend to 4 core theological doctrines that she works through and explores. There are many more that she attends to across her work. but I explore four, but they are not quite necessarily the point of the book. The point of the book is her. So theology is pulled together, it's revealed, it's known in deep ways through one's experience and one's experience signaling a particular kind of life. So knowing something about the life of a theologian, I believe with my whole heart is critically important. The small details of their life inform how they want to know the divine and how they also want to be known in the world. The major events of their lives are also the lens and filters through which the divine is felt, understood, known, and interpreted. So Oduyoye's theology is critical. She's written thousands and thousands of pages naming and expounding upon it, but her life is just as important as her theology. Theology is not an isolated invention. It's a culmination of the details of one's living. And Oduyoye's living shows us something about the movement of the divine in this world through centering and exploring her world. So for me, a core point of this book is to get a rich theological perspective from an African woman, but to also say, and we care about and want to know who this African woman is. So a lot of people ask me, Dr. O, okay, why this book? This book for me is literally a gesture of respect. It is what my culture, Yoruba culture, we call it kunle, which is a kneeling respectfully before an elder. So this is my kunle to Auntie Mercy. I know that I have numerous things that I want to explore, including how my identity as an African raised in America inform my particular theology. But before I move in that direction, I'm from a culture that honors our elders. Thus, I must honor my elders. So this book, The Theology of Mercy, Amba Oduyoye, is my recognizing that my voice and my theological curiosities are so because of women like Oduyoye, who came in first, who challenged first, who sharpened first, who moved against the grain first, who honored the particularity of herself first. This book is the beginning of establishing myself as a conversation partner when it comes to the theological ideas of pertinent people in the field. It also continues in the legacy of Oduyoye's emergence and work overall. African women across time, and unfortunately still today, have had to create their own visibility. The Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians was formed in large part, and that's detailed more in chapter 3, it was formed in large part to provide opportunity for African women to share their work, to sharpen their work, to have conversations about their work in their respective fields and in their communities, in their societies, and in the larger world. So this book, it provides continuity in this particular African woman offering a work about how the life work of Oduyoye has changed the theological world. It's my means of saying, I'm going to be in conversation with this theological figure. A lot of people ask, especially since I was born in Nigeria, but I was raised in the United States. Okay, why you to write this book? So what qualifies me to write this book, I believe are two things. First is it's pure deep admiration and interest. Oduyoye does, across her bodies of work, she does some really careful theologizing. She does deeply important critical analysis of cultural practices that people in my generation can pick up and walk with and continue to work with and work through. And she does this all under this commitment to take seriously a mission to uplift African women. Her task is frankly, it's tremendous. Second, in many ways, I am the reason why I'm also qualified to write this book. I am an African woman raised in America. Again, I call myself American African. So I'm an American African woman who has something to say. And in the spirit of Auntie Mercy, I am deciding to join this conversation by lifting up her story. Oduyoye has paved the way for African women to fearlessly contribute their voices to theological conversations that typically have not made room for them, typically has not considered them. This book, in many ways, adds to the chorus of African women who claim that we are here. We don't need anybody's permission to speak, but we relish the support and encouragement of sisters who encourage us forward. And in this, those who push Christian theology forward as well. I get a summary question. Okay, how is Oduyoye important to women who are trying to think through gender in religion? Well, my response is that Oduyoye is, she's many things. She's an example, she's a leader, she's a binding agent as she kind of lives in many spaces. She's a binding agent in many rooms. She shows women what theological courage looks like. Forging a path for African women's theology in a discipline that's slow to even recognize African theology or Black theology or womanist theology, Oduyoye's fearlessness is a model of self-assurance. If African women had any doubt about whether they belong in a room, they can look to Oduyoye to remind them that African women do not walk into rooms, but we grace these spaces with our presence, our insight and wisdom, and with our vision. Oduyoye, if we watch her, we can see how a woman claims space. We watch Oduyoye to also see how women across cultures can band together for theological good. She is a conversation partner in many different ecumenical spaces, and she does so intentionally. She's been a connecting agent for women whose experiences and stories share certain edges and share certain corners. And she edges them close together to coordinate and work for a welcoming, ecumenical, and global space to rethink age-old theological ideas from new angles. And she also wants to just challenge the Christian church, to live into its fullness. I've been asked, who should be reading Oduyoye, and why do you think they should be reading her? I want anybody who's interested in the theological journey of Oduyoye to read this book. But I have a very important caveat. I want people to read this book not to get a sense of how to categorize African women's theological voices or how to criticize African women's theological voices, but to be introduced to their range. Mastery of Oduyoye or any African women's theological voice is not the goal, but the goal should be instead a desire to expand how one thinks about the evolution of theology in African women's contexts. Another question I get asked is, how does this book, how does it push, how does it aid in constructing knowledge within the public sphere? This book, it continues to push the center, push to center African women as significant contributors who help determine the shape of Christian theology in the world. I don't know if you received the Christology chapter that I sent along, but Oduyoye is making this really interesting move around Mary and Elizabeth and how they're involved in this really important Christological moment. And thank you, Dr. Hunt, for saying my voice comes through. I just come out and say, Mary and Elizabeth, they're doing Christology. They should actually be the ones from which we kind of gain Christological language. These two women kind of recounting the experiences of their bodies, they're the ones doing Christology. That should be our starting point in how we talk about the Christ figure. So Oduyoye identifies and then gives us room to explore kind of theological ideas in that particular manner. So hopefully this book helps us see that African women, they are not outliers in theological conversation, but they have a unique lens because of their experience, because of their life, that can sharpen our theological standpoints in ways that others will not, we simply will not arrive at because we have not lived a life that has given us that particular lens. They're providing perspectives that many of us, we won't be able to see until they introduce us to it. So the public will be challenged to, anybody who reads this book will be challenged to examine the contours of their ideologies and beliefs if they spend time with this book and they spend time taking seriously Auntie Mercy's story and approach. They'll be forced to wrestle with context and name how it textures all of our hermeneutical, all of our interpretive moves and decisions. This work and Auntie Mercy's body of work at large challenges everyone contributing their voice to Christian theology to not only take her accounts seriously, but to also reflect on themselves and take that very seriously as informing and determining their theological outlook and approach. So those are some questions that I get asked often. I kind of want to stop there because I feel like I've been talking for a strong 10 minutes or so. And I want questions, I want conversation. I can offer some thoughts around how she approaches the four major doctrines that I outline in the work. But I also was very intentional to spend the first two chapters just talking about her life, talking about her biographical, like giving biographical information, including her educational upbringing, how seeing how children were treated impacted her theological outlook, seeing how women were treated in her culture, in other cultures, just her witnessing what surrounded her life. It impacted, it sharpened everything. There's a book on, a chapter on literally her feminist formation, her wrestling with a con culture being more matrilineal, but kind of getting mixed messages around that. Coming into Yoruba culture, the culture I'm from, that's patriarchal, patrilineal as well, wrestling with that, seeing points that are common in her culture, seeing points that are different. The third chapter I dedicate to just her ecumenical work, because it is great. And all of it, and in all of it, she wants to uplift African women, but she's also not afraid to attend to the challenges that are in front of her. And then the remaining chapters are doctrinal exploration. And then I try to have a conversation around, okay, those of us who are after her, what can we take and move forward with? That's an overview in general of the book. But okay, I will pause there. That's my rundown. That's my overview. Those are my initial thoughts. But let's have a conversation. I'd love to hear, Dr. Hunt, I don't know if you want to facilitate this, but I'd love to hear any thoughts or questions that anybody in the room may have.
Thank you so very much, Dr. O. You show not only your scholarly ability, but also your teaching prowess and bringing us along. We're now well acquainted with the book. We've got a good feel for the outline in our minds, and now we can begin to fill in some of the pieces. I want to thank you for introducing the life and work of a brilliant pioneer in womanist work in religion. And I want to underscore that I think your own work, which is in this volume, very clear at certain points, not only in the choices that you made of the the four areas that you looked at, the ecclesiology and God and so forth, but also in terms of your own theological method. So you've made that very clear to us. I'd like to make two other comments and then I'll open the floor. But before I do that, I want to welcome in a very particular way our dear friend Shannon Clarkson, who is here. And many of you know Shannon and her late partner, Letty Russell, one of the really great feminist theologians, and dear friends and longtime colleagues of Mercy's. So Shannon, great to have you with us. And really, I hope this is enjoyable for you, and also that you'll agree with me that it reflects very much the Mercy we all know. And that's probably the highest compliment of a book that like this, that it reflects, in my view, very much the person that I know. Let me make two other comments and then I'll open it broadly. First, several people on this program and many others in the field, as has already become clear, have known Mercy. And we not only find her in your pages, but your clearly written, thorough, and informative book is accessible to a general reader, which is not something you can say about a lot of theological materials. It's also wonderfully suited for classroom work. So I think you not only do her proud, but I'm at this point making the invitation to my colleagues here gathered to not only get a hold of this book, which again, the details will be in the notes, The Theology of Mercy, Amba Oduyoye, Ecumenism, Feminism, and Communal Practice, University of Notre Dame, but begin to think about using this method where the person's life is so important. And it says so much about the choices the person made, about the work that they do. Start to think about that method with your own groups, whether in a community setting, whether in a classroom setting, or even for your own reflection. I think that's really absolutely signal in all of this. And I can report that we at Water have at least 8 volumes written or edited by Mercy. And I will just hold up the pile for a moment. And I will highlight just several, one of which is Mercy's poems. And I didn't see any reference to these. I maybe missed it in your book, but these are really wonderful. She did poems, and they're edited by Elizabeth Amoa, who's another dear friend and colleague of hers. And of course, autographed to Water, Elizabeth and Mercy. We also have a book on HIV/AIDS, which I think is extremely important, that Mercy did, and often doesn't get as much attention as it needs. But just to see that she wrote in her own distinctive hand in giving this book to us from Talitha Kumi Center in Ghana. And it was her intentional way of linking Water with that center, which we very much appreciated. And then we also have, of course, the well-known volume, The Will to Arise, Woman, Tradition in the Church in Africa, which she and Masimbi Kanyoro edited, and for which the late Katie Geneva Cannon wrote the foreword. So this is a very important book. And Mercy inscribed this to us in the following way: remain blessed. January 2002, remain blessed. And I can say we do today remain blessed, as she is very much among us, thanks to you, Dr. O. The second thing I couldn't pass over was the fact that the most recent time I saw Mercy was at the inaugural gathering of the Center for Womanist Leadership, held in Richmond, Virginia, April 5th to the 7th, 2018, now 6 years ago. That meeting was the brainchild of the late Katie Geneva Cannon, for whom the center at Union Presbyterian Seminary in Richmond, Virginia is now named. How many of you were at that meeting? Yes, several of us were there. We who were there can never forget the closing ritual, when participants rendered homage to the elders and received their blessings. All participants were invited to process to the front of the room, where Mercy, Lisa, would you be so good as to put the picture up, please? Where Mercy and Katie Cannon sat as revered elders. They gave and received blessings and homage, and I think it was for me a magnificent experience to be in their communal presence. I'll put in the notes the link to this picture, which accompanies an article about the conference, which I actually, at the behest of Dr. Cannon, had the honor to write. I leave you with that image for now. Thanks, Lisa. We turn now to our discussion, cognizant of the time limits, but eager to hear from participants. The floor is now open. Please use the raise hands button, which is down at the bottom of your screen under reactions, and be brief so we can hear as many people as possible. And then I'll close us at 2 o'clock with gratitude. for our speaker who has to leave to meet with her eager students. And those who want to stay for a few minutes to discuss things are welcome to do so. I am positive that our conversation will not be finished by then. We've already learned a great deal, and I know there's more to come. So the floor is open. And again, with thanks to Dr. O for taking our questions and entertaining our comments. Please raise your hand. You can also put your hand up if you like. Diane, would you like to ask a question or make a comment?
Well, I just want to add another memory. And Shannon, you'll remember this with me. Shannon and Letty were actually the architects of the International Feminist Theologians Doctorate in Ministry, of which I was a part. And we were with the Circle of Concerned African Theologians that Mercy kind of called into being, as you've heard already. But the memory that I have, Shannon, is when Mercy took us to her family home in Ghana. And I see her mother sitting there, and I see her niece sitting there. And as I see the picture of Mercy and Katie Cannon, I think of this incredible woman in her family home in Ghana who is adored and revered by her mother and her niece, and who adores and reveres them as well. And so I add that into our conversation because she lived everything that she wrote and she spoke, and from generation to generation.
Thanks, Diane. The floor is open. Who will be next? Yes, please. Catherine House, please go ahead. Thank you. Welcome.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Oredein. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about your this methodology that you talked about, that in writing your book, that this is an homage, an act of appreciation, which I think is a very not necessarily the way all books are written. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about your own process of wanting to honor this amazing theologian with your work. And also, if this is something that you do pedagogically, how do you teach this? How are you encouraging your students to bring appreciation to work as you and theologians, if there's a crossover there? Thanks so much for today.
Thank you, Dr. House. I could pretend that we don't know each other. We know each other. We wrote our dissertations together, and so we, Dr. House is very fully aware of just the process that I went through. I am going to push back a little bit on some of the language in the question, and also a little bit of language that Dr. Hunt used as well, because I think it makes for interesting conversation. Methodology, what is it? But the most important question around methodology is for who is it for? I don't call what I do a methodology. I just do it. And I do it as a means of making sense of how I process somebody's words and information in life, but also just how I honor what's in front of me. I had no intention to say, okay, I'm going to do this type of methodology. I'm going to make this the process. I didn't try to force writing this book into any shape that it was not already. So I get really weary around the language around methodology. I think it's for white males. And I think everybody who's not a white male, we have to try to find ways to press what we do into their molds. And it doesn't fit. So I don't call it a methodology. I call it honoring and expressing what was in front of me in the first place. And again, honoring that I bring myself into this writing. And to me, it was just a meeting of the reality of the narrative. If somebody wants to call it a methodology, fine, but I don't call it a methodology. I think methodology is such a tricky thing, and it can be cumbersome more than helpful. So So thank you for the question. But in terms of, yeah, how I did it, it's a practice in attentiveness and observation. Reading all of her work, okay, what is here? And how do I want to say and articulate what is here for somebody who is not going to read all her work? How do I want to help condense it in the clearest way possible, in the way that is true to form about what and how she wrote, what she wrote about and how she wrote, what she was trying to convey in what she wrote. And then the tricky part for me, especially when a project like this starts as a dissertation and then it has to transform into a book, because over the years, your mind has changed around the number of things, or you don't think what you thought that what you wrote 5 years ago anymore, and you have to kind of bring things up to speed. The challenge is all of a sudden you're a conversation partner. And you're thinking this giant in the field who's been active for well over 65 years, 70 years, I all of a sudden have to speak about her and what she's written about in a way that is not only honorific, but true and concise, which means I have to bring my questions and my doubts and my millennial American African perspective around questions of how she's talking about gender into clearer focus, sharper focus, in a way that doesn't fit her into my ideational molds, but is able to objectively name, okay, this is what's going on. This is how her ideas have progressed or changed. And this is what I think about, or this is how I think how the evolution of her ideas can help in our conversations today. There's a lot of moving parts, but it starts with examining the truth of what she's written and examining the truth from how I'm reading it as well, and allowing those to meet. I am just talking, Dr. House, but hopefully I'm attending to that question. And pedagogically, how you do it is you just have to be truthful about who is in the room and what is in a room when you're reading somebody else who's also in the room in that textual form. In all my classes, if I'm introducing a reading from someone, we don't just come and just start talking about the ideas. That in many ways doesn't really make sense. I have to, I'm going to show you a picture of what they look like. I'm going to give you a little background. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what they did before they started teaching, because all of those things inform how they're going to be talking about class or race or feminism or Christology or womanism or whatever. Their ideas don't come out of nowhere. Their ideas literally come from them. So I have to say something about them. So pedagogically, that's what I try to infuse in my class sessions. If we're reading about somebody who is Caribbean American, I'm going to call them Black, but I'm also going to say they came from this particular context. Let's acknowledge and name that that's shaping how they're starting to think about X, Y, and Z in the United States. All of this is important. Yeah, pedagogically, you just make sure you bring the full person into the room. So that's how I would answer that. Yeah. Another thing, Dr. Hunt, that you said that I want to push back a little bit on, just because I don't want to leave it unattended to. Oduyoye might call herself womanist, depending on what room she's in, depending on the circumstance and the situation. I've heard her say this in person. We were at a conference and I was responsible to take her to go get some lunch. And I said, do you consider yourself womanist? She said, it depends. In many ways, that speaks to what African women have to sort through, which is everybody loves categories. Everybody has to know and wants to know where to put somebody else so they can understand themselves better. over and against that person. So even the notion of African woman, very, very interesting and multifaceted. My African womanness is not the same as Auntie Mercy's. And there's a habit sometimes that we see a Black woman and we say, oh, she's womanist, which is not necessarily the case. I have a lot of Black feminism colleagues who everybody just kind of throws them in the womanist basket, and they don't quite identify that way. Womanists name themselves in a certain way, and if that person has not named themselves that way, then we have to honor them and ask, okay, can you tell me who you are? Like, who are you? Because I'm interested and I want to know, and I want to make sure I'm calling you by the name you want to be called. So not anything against you, Dr. Hunt, but sometimes if she's in womanist spaces, she'll say, okay, I'm womanist, sure. In white feminist spaces, she might say, you know what, if you need to say womanist, fine, I'm womanist. But she's very, very clear, even in the language of African women's theology. She doesn't say African feminist theology. She doesn't say African womanist theology. African women's theology is literally her means of naming herself. Now, the other labels are for other people in a really interesting way. It seems for the most part, she doesn't mind it, but it's also very clear that she has her own language that she's put on her work. And it's just interesting to see what people do with that. I just wanted to kind of
Sure, appreciate that very much. Very clarifying. Shall we move on then to thank you, Dr. House, for your comments. Shall we move on to Dr. Rosemary Ganley? And you'll need to unmute, I think. Oh, you're set. You're set.
You can hear me now? Yes.
I can.
Oh,
Thank you.
Dr. O, I'm just thrilled to be here. I'm just thrilled to be here. And I just need to tell you a little bit about my bio. I lived in Jamaica in the 70s and taught, of course. It was, I mean, it wasn't fair to the Jamaican women who came because I was an outsider, but a willing, humble outsider. Anyway, today on this call is Anna Kasafi Perkins of Kingston, Jamaica, who taught with me at this little theological college. And is that a marvel of water and its global reach? Then, Dr. O, I went to Tanzania for 3 years. And there wasn't, at least I could find, much critical theological work in Tanzania. But I know the continent has 50 countries. In any case, my question for you is, I've been reading Musa Dube and about post-colonial African interpretations of the Bible. And do you find the fact that Christianity was Western and colonial is an impediment to the growth of our global unity in the feminist theology field?
I will say thank you for your question, Rosemary. I will say colonial Christianity is an impediment. But I'm also deeply curious about what unity means and what it implies. If unity means everyone gets to exist in the fullness of their reality together and work towards the greatest good with the least amount of harm, then sure. But I think terms like unity, terms like reconciliation, especially with the racial kind of descriptor on it, if not interrogated around who the word is coming from and what they mean by it, if that's not interrogated, then it can do more harm than good. But colonial Christianity, for sure, that emphasizes looking at difference as a justification for division is deeply harmful. That applies that to race, that applies that to gender, that applies that to class, that starts, instead of saying, okay, we're different, let's figure out how to be together, but says we're different, that means one of us is more qualified to outline what our living looks like, then that is certainly harmful. And I think colonial Christianity, and Willie Jennings talks about it in a lot of his work. It's attached to merchants, and it's attached to militarized violence and force. And the last M he uses is missionaries. And the Christian message is kind of used basically to promote this notion of expansion and empire.
Mhm.
So I guess you have to ask, like, what is the Christianity doing? What is it for? Because a lot of times Christianity that doesn't have a colonial intention is going to be self-reflective, and it's going to be looking back on the people who are bringing it and say what needs to be undone within ourselves in order to join with other communities, other cultures, and other peoples in a way that's beneficial for all. Colonial Christianity looks outward. A true Christianity is going to first and foremost look inward and say that justice begins with us and what's happening within us, and then it moves out into the world. Thank you for your question.
And thank you for your answer. Let us move on to Chelsea Jones. Go ahead, unmute, and you're more than welcome.
Thank you so much. First off, hello, Dr. O. As a former student, I just can't begin to explain like just how good it is to be back in such a fun learning space. And thank you for your work in your writing. So, you know, I have like I have a question that can go in a variety of directions, but I guess the best way I've been able to hone it down is as a Black woman and a queer woman who, you know, recognizing and acknowledging to like being a practicing theologian, practicing feminist, practicing womanist, depending on the space and the category, right? And going back a little bit to the topic of categories as they pertain to Black women and the Black experience, I guess the best way I could kind of hone my question in is how does one continue to honor those that have come before us in honoring the ancestors and the history that comes with it and the history that comes with the experience, while also simultaneously challenging and pushing and having that internal tug of war, because I know my experience right now isn't the same experience as my ancestors, and it won't be the same experience as the generations that come after me. So the simultaneous challenging and pushing while also actively working towards this like duality and maybe even plurality, because I think as a Black woman, like there's it's multifaceted, right? The experience is multifaceted. So I guess my question is, how does one hold it all, and how would you explain that in your work and in your writing, holding it all without exhausting your senses, without exhausting your spaces, and without exhausting your resources?
Absolutely. Good to see you again, Chelsea. One of my best students, y'all. Doing great things in the world. I appreciate your question because it's an honest question, and I am all for honesty in when we're talking about these things. Yeah, it's similar to if you're taking a class and they haven't gotten the memo that they need to have a diverse list of conversation partners. I call readings conversation partners. You take what you need from it. You take what is interesting or thoughtful or something that you can build with and build upon. You kind of take those things, leave the rest. And you say, okay, I'm going to build from here. I'm going to build from this idea. I'm going to build from this point because this point, this idea, it has room for me. So you, again, bring yourself into that moment and say, okay, Augustine's saying something that I can build off of. Bart's saying something that has a little bit of room for me. So let's see where this goes. Oduyoye is saying something around, again, gender and sexuality is such an interesting question with Oduyoye. Okay, there's something that I can build off of. So it's kind of like passing the baton on to you. The second way I would kind of answer that is you are what's honoring your ancestors. If you are staying honest and true to your voice, you are their honor. You are their honor living in the present. You are their extension living in the present. You are somebody's ancestor as well from the future, you know? So you keep in mind that you are part of that continuation, and that each previous generation, they're kind of doing something a little different. They're kind of growing, they're kind of evolving, and you are in that lineage and you are in that line as well. So you are their honor. And in your wisdom of picking things that you can tell has a little bit of room for you, you move with that thing and you continue to expand and grow, and you continue in that lineage and tradition. So count yourself within their lineage, but also don't take on things that are not, that don't have enough space for you. Work with the things that have room and space for you. Thank you for your question.
Thank you both. Let's move on to Pamela Miller.
Hi, Dr. O. Thank you for your work. And I want to thank you for how you identify yourself as a American African as opposed to an African American, something a term I struggle with too. And for lifting up and highlighting one of the women whose shoulders you stood on or are still standing on, and especially for an immigrant, referring to another immigrant and the work that was done here with theology. The question I really want to ask is, with all the sort of setback we're seeing with advancement with women's rights and the pushback, what do you think she would be saying to people, theologians, people of Christian background, how to counteract these moves? How do we reclaim our steps and move forward?
And to clarify, Pamela, what would Oduyoye be saying?
Yes. What would she be telling us?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your, thank you again, honest question about what the reality is and what we're trying to think through together. Oduyoye has always been a proponent of what she calls a two-winged theology. She says a bird cannot fly with one wing; it needs two. So her mission is not to say women only need women and that's it. Women should just fix everything. She's saying women need to be honored, empowered, lifted up just as much as men, but we also need men to join the movement, to join what justice and equality looks like theologically and also in the larger world. Because if you are African, if you are African descended, more likely than not, yes, we call things religious, but the spiritual is so intertwined with how we live in the world anyway, that in many ways, it's a call for men and women, for everyone to essentially live into the truest version of themselves. Themselves being, we are spiritual beings that are in, like the spirituality is intertwined in our culture. Holistic notions of holisticness, notions of community, collectiveness, under creator, all these spiritual values, ideas, and principles that, again, shows up in religious frameworks. They're inherent in what it means to be a person of African descent. So she's saying, like, we should live into our true self. Now, she's going to say that through utilizing language of the Christian church, because again, people kind of find identity within that as a religious space that uplifts certain spiritual ideas and values. But she's going to call forth, like, you have to live into your true self. If who you are requires the denigration of another, then who you are is in trouble. Who you are is not complete. Who you are is not full. So what would it take for you, somebody who has power or lives in a certain space in the hierarchy, what would it take for you to find yourself and live into your true self, which requires living in unity and living collectively with me and my true self? So all that to say, there's a clarion call for people who are exercising power in whatever way, shape, or form to understand that they're not living in their completeness. To be complete, I need you and you need me. And we have to live holistically. So if that's missing, we got to figure out how to undo that thing which is binding certain people, including the one who thinks they have the power to do the binding as well. So she's saying we need everybody, but we need everybody to live into their full and true self. And if you're operating in ways that require power and harm and violence towards another, you're not only harming them, you're harming yourself. Thank you for your question.
And thank you very much for your response. I have the unhappy task of drawing us to a close as we come in.
5 more minutes, 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes.
All right. I'll postpone my unhappiness.
I want to make sure
who else has, anybody else who hasn't spoken yet that would like to ask a question or make a comment? Yes, Charlotte Cook, go ahead.
So I'm curious, Dr. O, how Mercy Amba might have changed a response to a question I asked her in the course that I took. So in all fairness, it was 16 years ago. And it was a course in Kenya on African women as feminist theology. And we must have had a conversation in class about our bodies. And I asked her then how she and other African women would, how they felt about donating organs in order to help a loved one. And she said they would be very much opposed to that because it would desecrate the sanctity of the body by making it less than whole. And I'm wondering, as the world changed in the 16 years, how might she respond now?
I think I don't want to provide an answer that is untrue to her particular thought process and mind around.
Right, I understand that.
I'm not sure. I mean, in the theological anthropology chapter, I moved through the Akan cosmological understandings of body and soul, and how there's a focus on body, whereas the soul is considered the most important thing. So judgment upon a body is judgment upon a soul, and humans can't do that. So I kind of try to undo how patriarchal gender arguments are kind of aligned in that way. This sounds like a personal question for Auntie Mercy to answer herself. I'm sure there are reasons that are probably deeply personal, deeply cultural, of why she said it that way then, and it may or may not change today. But I don't know. I think that's a question directly for her. I'm not going to speak for her in that manner, but it's an interesting question to be sure.
Thank you. And I think a wise response. It would be interesting to see how she feels about some other topics too that we would love to hear from her on. More to the same point though. I'm wondering what your connection is at this point to the circle, what they're doing, and if these kinds of conversations are happening there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I have been trying very elusively to kind of be connected with the circle. I know that they had a recent meeting in Ghana, I believe. So I have not been a part of their particular conversations, but I'm without speaking with a sense of certainty, I'm sure that these deeply personal conversations around what bodies mean and what they can do and what they can be in respective African cultures, as well as in conversation with Western culture, is likely coming up. But for me, the question around that is always like, from where is that question coming? And towards what end? Like, what is it attached to? Where one has to, I don't know, think about their body in that way. Is it commonplace in African culture to, bring up questions around organ donation? Or is that more of a Western thing that African women now have to kind of sort through what they think about? Essentially, well, what does it mean that they're spending time and energy thinking through how Western practices apply to them? I just think it's just an interesting thing to note. And not that these women are not asking these questions. I'm just always fascinated with, are these their questions? Did these questions originate from them? And what do we do when African women are spending time and energy trying to answer questions that are placed on them, but have not originated from them? I'm always fascinated with that. But thank you for the question. Yeah, I'm not in the circle quite yet, but I
Sure.
hear about the meetings, and I'm just always curious, just from whence does what they talk about originate from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. And you made such an important distinction, I think, in your book of the matrilineal and patriarchal nature of the culture in Ghana, for example, as opposed to the patriarchal and patrilineal cultures of your own native Nigeria. And I just wondered how, because those realities alone set up some very important cultural and religious parameters in which to have such, not just that conversation around organ, but so many of these conversations. I just think it's really it follows very well on where you've gone, and maybe someplace where you want to go next, and of where you see your own work going next, if you'd like to say something about that.
Yeah.
And I preface that with the notion that we hope you'll come back and share more of it with us. So even just the slightest précis will be appreciated today.
Absolutely. I appreciate that pivot. What do I work on? What do I write about? I'm so interested in my work attending to questions that start from me. So speaking of where questions and ideas start from, I am Nigerian, born in Nigeria, raised in the United States, which means I have spent time in Black African American churches. I have spent time in white churches. I have spent time in Nigerian churches as well. I have had to sort out what my theology is based on who I am and how I live, given those spaces, given I was raised in a US educational system in a Nigerian household. So I have certain cultural ideas in the house, different cultural ideas at school and in the larger public and in society. I've had to think through, what is my theology given all these different places that I live? So I want the work that I do going forward to be work that answers those questions. I'm working on currently a book called The Care Book, around a theological ethic of care. because I am so interested in how Christians care. How do we learn what we care about? How do we express such care? Where does it come from? What informs that we should even care and what we care about? There's a chapter around Africans and African Americans and the tension that exists between those communities. There's a chapter around the term racism and how it impacts certain people and why they care that they may or may not be called racist. These are just questions that are born from who I am and what I've observed. I do work on theopoetics as well, because I think doing God talk through creative expression is deeply African, but also very unique to me as well. So I'm interested in doing work on this discourse that I'm calling Black theopoetics, that adds a layer of particularity to the general discourse of theopoetics based on what it means to be Black African descended.
Floor is open. If anybody would like to unmute and raise a comment or question, you're welcome to do so. Gabriela Meyer from Germany, please.
I would like to add a memory also as a gesture of respect towards Mercy. In 2013, there was the World Assembly of the WCC in Busan, South Korea. And at the time, we were working hard to find people from the Global South who were willing to speak up for LGBTI global network. And Mercy was willing to do that in our lunch break. We appreciated that so much because we needed allies from the Global South. We had many people from the North, but there was the accusation, oh, it's Western import. But Mercy, speaking as an African woman, as an ally, that was so helpful, that opened the doors for people, especially also African, but also from other countries who were searching for support from the Global South. And I still deeply, appreciate her courage.
And thank you for bringing that to us. That's a wonderful experience and a wonderful insight to share. Not surprising, I might add, not surprising at one level, just a person who spoke out on many issues, even issues that were not comfortable or expected. Rosemary Ganley, go ahead, please.
Dr. O, not always do we get some spiritual strength from our theological writing and discussions. There's a part of ourselves that is engaged in thinking and judging and taking in new information, but you have the double gift of spiritual counsel and strengthening and just plain joy that you're communicating, in addition to new learning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Anyone else that would like to make a comment? Dr. O, anything you'd like to say to us, or any?
I appreciate you all. I love hearing the stories as well. All of that is just confirmation of what an amazing force Auntie Mercy still is in this world. And the only thing I want this book to do is to continue generating conversation and buzz around her. I look forward to the book that says, Dr. O didn't go far enough. There needs to be, I look forward to those books being out there. As long as the attention is directed on her, then I have done my job.
Yeah, and very well. And I like so much what you did in the book about her work, her not only her experience of being in England, but then her going to the World Council of Churches and being so engaged with the World Council over such a long time. The thing that I thought was kind of ironic, that she felt, as you reported it, that she owed a certain debt of gratitude, I guess you'd say, to the World Council. And I thought it was the other way around, that in fact, the World Council of Churches owed an enormous debt of gratitude to her. And I'm thinking also of the great colleague of hers, the great Ofelia Ortega, who was the first woman to be and the only woman so far to be the rector of the seminary in Matanzas, Cuba. They were certainly collaborators over the years. And so many other women of that generation, and especially women from the global South, going to Geneva. I mean, what a sacrifice, really and truly, what a sacrifice. And I just thought that was so. I wondered what some of her African colleagues thought about that. You know, she certainly didn't owe the World Council; they owed her big time, and
Yeah,
over the years, greater debt, I'd say.
Yeah, to me, just the breadth of work that she did to ensure that African women's voices were present in certain spaces and certain rooms is tremendous to me. The language I put around it is she had to have been called to do that type of work, to sometimes be the only one, to be the one who's kind of starting these initiatives within these larger spaces that barely invited her, or she's one of few who are there. And for her to have that courage and power and presence to say, we need to start an initiative for women, or we need to do this, or we need to do this, shows that there was a fire. Still is a fire
from the student Christian movement. I mean, she was part of the World Student Christian movement, and many people that I knew, and in those days, the term feminist, as you rightly point out, was contested. And people that I know who were part of that movement, for example, who were in Addis Ababa for the meeting of the World Student Christian Federation, that's where they met her first, when she was of that kind of post England, you know, after her studies. Where she had studied, of course, in Africa, but then being in Cambridge, I think, from what you described, made a major difference. But that World Student Christian Federation, of course, some of us who were involved in that call the World Council of Churches the rest home for people who were part of the World Student Christian Federation, or we consider the World Student Christian Federation as sort of the kindergarten to the World Council. But she really was a singular presence in those places. And for a long time, and in such an important way, and working with other women, other African women. So my question to you is, how did she do it? You know, there was nobody ahead of her. In forming my question, I said there was nobody ahead of her. There were no mentors. There were no role models other than her mother and her grandmother. And I have this same question about many of our own U.S. foremothers as well as African foremothers. Who was before Mary Daly? I guess Nell Morton a little bit, but who was before Rosemary Ruther? Who was before Elizabeth Schussler-Fiorenza in Germany? Who was before Ada Maria Isasi Diaz? Who was the mentor for Ivone Gebada in Brazil? I mean, these women mentored each other, and they did it together, and they were friends. I mean, that's the part. That's a piece that I got from your book, was that people that she mentioned, and she mentioned Mary Daly, she mentioned Rosemary, she mentioned Elizabeth Schussler-Fiorenza. I think it's just remarkable. Shannon, you're nodding your head. I think you know that too, that there was nobody who's that, you know, they go, well, I didn't have a mentor. Well, guess what? There weren't any, you know. And she talked about Vissertruth and a few other male theologians who were mentors to her that you mentioned in the book. But she was the first. I mean, you know, Sally Ride was out in space, but Mercy was in those circles. I marvel. I marvel. Shannon, unmute, dear Shannon, if you'd like to comment, just unmute. Lisa, can you help Shannon unmute? Thanks, please. Shannon, we're going to have to unmute you. At the bottom of your screen on the left, there's a mute, like a little microphone, and it'll have a red line through it. If you can just press a button and get to that.
Okay.
There you go.
Her Letty's mantra was always never go anywhere by yourself. Always have another woman with you, so that you can support each other and show that women working together is a really good thing. And the support is really important, but she tried to make sure that all of her students knew that, and that all the women that she was involved with in the council also knew it, that they didn't come by themselves or feel like they were alone.
I mean, I would think, at least in Oduyoye's case, she just felt that she had to. She had to be in these spaces. And you would think, or maybe you would imagine, that some of the other women who were the first, who were the innovators, who were the ones who were courageous enough to do and be something different, they felt a pull. And luckily, they found each other in these various spaces, but they were not going to not do it. You know, they felt so compelled to, yeah, to enact what they did and what they brought forth, and they changed the discourse.
Well,
So
and I think the creation of the circle was a brilliant idea too, that created a network of women.
Absolutely. But I mean, with the circle, even I've heard different things. Some say it. She said she had the idea in the 70s, and it didn't come into fruition until the late 80s. So I mean,
you get in the book. Yeah.
I mean, she was compelled. These women were compelled, and they could not walk away from it. And again, luckily they found each other and they saw, okay, we have the same energy around wanting things to be different, that we're gonna band together, we're gonna work with each other. At the bare minimum, we're gonna encourage each other forward.
And because she was at the WCC, she had a good wide breadth of women that she could get involved in, and who she could work with together and have them work in their own areas with other women, which I think was important.
But again, she's doing this as an African woman, you know, and all women are not the same. So you're carrying that distinct identity and culture and experience into that conversation, and you find common points and you work with those common points. But you never not feel your distinct identity in those spaces. Hopefully there was support there, but
the women she worked with were very supportive. I mean, they were from around the world. I mean, she put together quite a group. So
no, absolutely. Absolutely. So that they're just all courageous. Auntie Mercy and everybody who made the shift happen, just extremely courageous. Yeah.
For one.
I do got to run to class though.
Yes. Yes, we've waylaid you, and I didn't intend that, but you seemed willing to be waylaid.
Oh, absolutely.
And I want to thank you, and I want to say how happy I am for your students, because I think your pedagogical style and ability to express these ideas in a clear and careful way is a tremendous gift to them. So and to us today. So thank you so much.